Hey everybody, Legal Vices here, welcoming you to day 7 review of the Karen Read murder trial. That's right, we are reviewing day 7 of the Karen Read murder trial. Day 5 was crazy, day 6 was interesting, but oh my God, day 7 was, on the one hand, incredibly dull and boring. On the other hand, completely and ridiculously bad for the prosecution. Perhaps the worst day for the prosecution so far. And we've already seen evidence of snow blowing crime scenes, collecting blood evidence in red Solo cups and placed in brown paper grocery shopping bags to be transported. We've seen all of that, but I still think day 7 was probably the worst day for the prosecution we've seen yet. I have no idea why any of these witnesses were called for the prosecution. Every one of them undermined the prosecution's case very, very badly. Let's start off with Lieutenant Ray. Lieutenant Ray was continuing his testimony from day 6. They finished up direct examination, no biggie, showed some more videos of snow and houses. There was no cross-examination of him. The end. The next witness they called was Michael Camerano. He's a labor union worker, a labor worker, and he's friends with the family of John O'Keefe and with Karen Read. Now, you have to remember the prosecution's case, part of it is that the motive for the murder was there was a terrible relationship between the two, and they were talking about breaking it off. So out of a fit of rage or anger or whatever, Karen Read ran him over with a car. Well, the family friend testified under direct examination by the prosecutor. So again, this is the prosecutor's witness, Michael Camerano, testifying that there's a good relationship between their family and John and Karen. They showed a video of John O'Keefe in a bar wearing a hat, not a jacket, a hat, hoodie, and both shoes. No puffy jacket that the prosecution's been talking about and that he was found in, apparently. Michael Camerano testified that they typically drank Bud Light from a bottle. I mean, it's kind of sad you have to admit that to the world, that you and your big tough drinking buddy, cop drinking buddy, you sit around and drink Bud Light from a bottle, but be that as it may, that was the testimony. Karen drank something from a clear glass. It was a clear liquid, possibly vodka. He doesn't know. Then the prosecution showed more video showing Karen and John hugging and kissing. And under cross-examination, it was testified that he'd spent a lot of time with John and Karen. They were good friends. He liked Karen. Sometimes John would complain about Karen, not about anything. She was complaining that she was spoiling the kids too much. There was no hint of them breaking up. They were very affectionate in the bar. They were very happy to see each other. No arguing in the bar. Everything was normal. There was no tension between John and Karen at the bar. The next witness they called was Catherine Camerano, who was the wife of the previous witness, Michael Camerano. She's also the family friend. She works as a nurse. And she said Karen called her in a frantic state, trying to find where her husband was and where John, her boyfriend, was. And other people were calling about the same issue. And she texted messages of concern to Karen. And there's been no contact from Karen since the accident or since the incident. And that was the extent of her testimony. Under cross-examination, one brief issue said, well, are you aware that the reason Karen hasn't contacted anybody since the incident is because her phone was confiscated shortly after the incident? And she said, nope, didn't know that. That was the end of her testimony. The next witness by the prosecution, called by the prosecution, was Kurt Rubich. He was also a friend of the family. He was also friends with the Cameranos, friends with John, friends with Karen. Then the prosecutor asked one of the genius questions of the night about John's clothing. Are the clothes Mr. O'Keefe was wearing in the video on the night in question an accurate representation of the clothes he was wearing on the night in question? Yeah. Uh, and he also asked another genius question. Did you arrive at the time of... Sorry, this is briefly paraphrasing here. Did you arrive at the bar at the time you arrived? Yeah. He testified that John and Karen were not behaving unusually. They were behaving very normally. And of course, he had to testify that it was snowing. Under cross-examination, the defense lawyer brought out the testimony that John O'Keefe was not wearing a puffy jacket, and the witness never saw him wearing a puffy jacket that night. Karen did not appear drunk or under the influence at all. And Karen cares about the children. There was a brief question on redirect about, okay, were you privy to what happened behind closed doors? You don't know what the couple was like when they're out of the public, right? And he said, yeah, okay, I don't know. The next witness that was called was Rebecca Trayer. She was a bartender at the Waterfall Bar, the second bar they went to. Now, she knows the Alberts, all the Alberts, she knows them. And some were there at the bar on the night in question. ATF agent Higgins was there. Specifically, she mentioned that Brian Albert, and the homeowner, and his wife were there too. Kind of it. And on cross-examination, the Alberts are a well-known family, and she testified that John was in a good mood. The next lawyer, the next witness they called was a lawyer. That's why I said the next lawyer. The next witness they called was a lawyer, Nicholas Kolokithas. That's Kolokithas. That was his name. He arrived at the Waterfall Bar around 9 p.m. and John and Karen arrived around 11 p.m. And the lawyer was drinking Captain Morgan and Coke. Do better, lawyer. You're a lawyer. Don't be drinking Captain Morgan and Coke. Come on, you can do better than that. Anyway, John was drinking beer. Karen was drinking something in a clear glass. And then he testified about the atmosphere. He said the atmosphere was it was a fun atmosphere. Everybody was in a good mood. There was no arguing between John and Karen, and all of the women sat together in a group at the bar. Now the guys kind of hung out together. Under cross-examination, the lawyer testified that he never saw any tension. John and Karen had a very normal relationship. There were no problems ever that he saw. And at the Waterfall Bar, John told him they were planning vacations together. No tension or fights that night at all. It was, in fact, he said it was the opposite. They were very affectionate towards each other. In fact, the witness's wife asked him, "Why aren't you that way with me?" So they were so good together. They were so happy and in a good mood together that this witness's wife is asking him, "Well, why don't you act that way? The way that John and Karen are acting together. Why do you act that way with me?" And then they showed video of people, which turned out to be Brian Albert and ATF agent Higgins, sort of facing off with fists up and wrestling and sparring and just kind of horsing around in the bar. John was not involved in it. And he also said that Karen was singing John's praises that night. And the final witness they called for the day was the lawyer's wife, Karina Kolokithas. Well, sorry about the pronunciation. I hope that's correct. Everybody was happy. She testified. She testified there were no arguments between anybody. Then she smiled at Karen a few times. Said John was really happy. John O'Keefe was wearing a baseball cap, jeans, and a light hoodie, no padded jacket. She said that Karen said she was continuously going on about how much she admired and looked up to John, how unconditionally he sacrifices. And she mentioned that John and Karen were planning trips for the future, and everybody was having a great time at the bar. In fact, John put his arm around Karen, and she described them as, quote, quite lovey-dovey that night. Under cross-examination, she testified that Karen frequently complimented John, and they were excited about this upcoming trip with him. And at some point, Jen McCabe grabbed Karen by the arm and said, "You're coming with me," and tried to pull her away from the group. And that was the end of the testimony. Uh, this whole day was weird. The prosecutors, who are using as one of their theories for how and why Karen Reed murdered her husband with a vehicle, is because they were having a terrible time together, and they were arguing and fighting and on the verge of breaking up, and they were thinking about breaking up, when every single witness the prosecution called testified to exactly the opposite of that. Every single one of them testified over and over and over again about how everything was great. They're a great couple. They're perfectly normal. They were all over each other that night. They were lovey-dovey. They were hugging and kissing. They were making other wives jealous. I don't understand. If you would have walked into that completely unaware of what was going on day 7, you would have thought it was the defense's case in chief, and they were calling witnesses to show what an awesome person Karen was, and how there was no reason for her to want to run him over with a car and murder him in the middle of the night suddenly. But no, that was the prosecution's case. Those were the prosecutor's witnesses in the prosecution's case in chief. Utterly, utterly incomprehensible and astounding. So let's see what day 8 brings. Because day 7 was, again, not a good day for the prosecution, and I believe, all in all, probably the worst day so far for the prosecution. And that is saying a lot if you've seen the reviews or the live parts of this trial up to this point. As I said, again, let's see what day 8 brings. Until then, Legal Vices saying good night and goodbye.